The snow was falling harder than it had all winter. Wind howled between the trees, turning every road into a sheet of white. Jason Burke squinted through the windshield of his truck as his wipers struggled to keep up with the storm. He had lived in the mountains long enough to know when it was time to head home, and tonight, he regretted staying out late picking up supplies from the next town over. As he rounded a bend near the edge of the forest, something caught his eye through the blur of snow. A dark shape moved near the tree line, slow, low to the ground, and oddly still. Jason eased off the gas and leaned forward, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. It was a dog, thin, trembling, and barely visible in the storm. The animal stood just off the road, her fur matted with snowflakes, her eyes locked with his through the falling snow. For a second, she didn't move. Then, as his truck rolled to a stop, she barked once sharp and clear, then turned around and looked behind her, deep into the woods. Jason stared, confused. Most stray dogs would run off or hesitate, but this one was different. Her bark hadn't sounded scared. It had sounded urgent. He sat there for a moment, unsure. He'd always had a soft spot for animals, especially since his retirement from the fire department 2 years ago. Life had slowed down, and while peaceful, it was also lonely. It was freezing outside. He wasn't dressed to wander into the woods. The dog barked again, more insistent this time. Then she took a few steps toward the trees, turned her head back to look at him, and stood still waiting. Jason sighed, then opened the door. The wind hit him like a wall of ice. He grabbed the flashlight from the glove box, zipped his coat up to his chin, and stepped into the snow. The dog's ears perked up, and she turned and moved further into the trees. Pausing every few feet to check if he was following, this better not be a wild goose chase. Jason muttered to himself, crunching. Through the snow, he followed her off the roadside, past the trees, and deeper into the forest. The wind whistled above them, bending branches and sending powder drifting down. Jason's boots sank with every step. The snow was nearly knee-deep in places, but the dog kept moving, always just far enough ahead to lead, never far enough to lose him. After about 15 minutes of trekking, Jason began to wonder if he should turn back. He was getting colder, and the road was no longer visible behind him. But then he heard something barely audible over the wind. A soft, high-pitched whimper. He stopped. The dog turned toward him, then trotted to a fallen tree lying half-buried. Under snow, she barked once more, urgently, and began digging with her front paws. Jason rushed forward and knelt beside her. With his gloved hands, he helped clear the snow away, and that's when he saw it. A shallow hollow under the log. And inside, barely moving, were tiny shapes. 3 of them puppies. Huddled together, their fur stiff with ice, their bodies silent. Jason's heart clenched. The mother dog lay beside them, whining softly, her eyes pleading with him. She hadn't been looking for shelter. She hadn't been lost. She had come for help. For them, Jason took off his coat without a second thought, and gently lifted the puppies inside, wrapping them tightly. The mother stepped back, as if understanding, then followed him when he stood. As he turned to head back through the snow, one thought repeated in his mind. She saved them. And now I have to save her. Jason's arms tightened around the bundled puppies as he trudged back through the snow, the icy wind biting at his face. The mother dog followed closely, limping slightly, but never letting him get more than a few feet ahead. Every now and then, she glanced up at him. Eyes filled with exhaustion, but also trust. He had no trail to follow his
own footprints were already vanishing beneath the fresh snowfall.
Trees loomed tall around him, their branches heavy with snow. But Jason moved forward with determination, guided by instinct and the soft weight of life cradled against his chest. The puppies barely moved. They were so small, so fragile, and so cold. He couldn't stop thinking about how long they had been out there, tucked under that log, surrounded by nothing but ice and wind. The mother had likely gone without food for days, perhaps longer, just to keep them warm. That kind of devotion shook him more than he expected. Jason's breath came in heavy bursts as he finally reached the road. His truck was barely visible. through the thick white haze, but he almost laughed with relief when he saw the faint outline. The mother dog reached it first, circling the truck anxiously while Jason fumbled with the door. He opened it quickly and slid inside, placing the puppies on the passenger seat and turning the heater on full blast. Then he stepped back out and opened the door on the other side. The mother dog hesitated for a moment, looking at her pups. Jason held out his hand. "It's okay," he said gently. "They're safe now. Come on." She climbed in slowly and carefully, her legs shaking. She curled next to the box where her puppies lay, her eyes fixed on them, even as the warmth of the heater hit her face. Jason shut the door and got back behind the wheel. He glanced at the clock. 9:42 p.m. The animal clinic in town would normally be closed by now, but Dr. Keller, the local vet, was known for her compassion. Jason reached for his phone and called. After a few tense rings, she picked up. "Jason, everything all right?" "Not really. We've got an emergency. A mother dog and 3 pups, barely alive. I'm on my way." She didn't hesitate. "Bring them in? I'll be waiting." The drive into town felt like the longest of Jason's life. He kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other hovering near the puppies, checking for movement, for breath. He turned up the heat until his fingers felt like they were burning. The mother dog never took her eyes off her babies. When he finally pulled up to the clinic, Dr. Keller was already outside in a heavy coat, her assistant by her side with a heated blanket. Jason opened the door and they sprang into action. Within moments, the pups were inside. It's placed under heat lamps and gently examined. Dr. Keller worked quickly, giving fluids and checking for frostbite. The mother was led to a separate room to be warmed and examined, but she whined and resisted, trying to return to her puppies. "Let her stay close," Jason said. "She's barely holding it together." Dr. Keller nodded. "She's protective. That's a good sign." Jason stood in the corner of the room watching as warmth slowly returned to the tiny bodies. One of the puppies stirred, letting out a weak squeak. Jason felt his chest tighten with emotion. "They're strong," Dr. Keller said softly. "They've been through a lot, but with some luck, they'll pull through." Jason nodded, his eyes fixed on them. So has she. He wasn't just talking about the mother dog anymore. In that moment, he realized something deep had shifted in him. He'd spent years trying to feel useful again after retirement, trying to find purpose. Tonight it had found him. Jason sat quietly on the bench in the corner of the clinic's recovery room, the warmth inside finally beginning to thaw the cold that had sunk into his bones. But he hardly noticed. His eyes were fixed on the heated table where the puppies lay nestled together beneath a fleece blanket. A soft hum filled the air from the warming lamps above them. Every small movement, a twitch of a paw, flick of an ear felt like a miracle. The mother dog, wrapped in her own heated blanket, lay just beside them. She had finally stopped pacing and whining. Her head rested on the edge of the table, eyes half closed, but she never looked away from her pups. Every few minutes, she would raise her head slightly, nudge one gently, then settle again. "She's remarkable," Dr. Keller said as she returned from the back of the clinic, gloves still on. Any other animal would have abandoned those pups in this kind of weather, but she stayed. She protected them. Jason nodded slowly. "She didn't just protect them. She came and got me. She led me right to them." Double quotes. Dr. Keller blinked. Saying she asked for help? Jason looked down at his hands. "I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it myself. She waited by the road like she knew someone would come. And when I stopped, it was like she knew I could help." Vet fell silent for a moment, then gently pet the dog's head. "Some dogs just know. They feel it. The way she looked at you when you brought them in. That wasn't fear. That was trust." Jason glanced at the dog again. Her ribs were visible through her fur. She was far too thin, and her paw was swollen from the cold, yet somehow she had kept those puppies alive in the wilderness during one of the worst snowstorms of the year. He leaned forward. "What are their chances?" Dr. Keller gave a careful answer. "Yes, they're weak, but they're fighters. We've got them hydrated, and their body temperatures are coming up. The first 24 hours are the most critical." Jason exhaled. Slowly, not realizing he had been holding his breath, one of the puppies let out a soft yawn and rolled onto its back, paws flailing briefly in the air before it tucked itself back into the warmth. Jason smiled. It was the first time he'd smiled like that in months. He had been drifting through life since retiring. His days had blurred together, chopping firewood, making coffee, taking long walks that ended nowhere. The firehouse had been his second home for 30 years. When he left, he had expected peace. Instead, he found silence. Until now. Do you think she had a home before? Jason asked. Dr. Keller nodded. She's not wild. You can tell by how she acts. She's cautious, but not feral. Someone raised her with care. Yeah, maybe she got lost. Maybe she was abandoned. Jason frowned. Or maybe someone's still looking for her. Dr. Keller paused. We'll scan her for a chip. But if nothing comes up, will dogs like her usually go to the shelter after recovery? Jason didn't respond right away. He watched as the mother raised her head again and gave one of the puppies a gentle lick. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the heater. Then Jason said quietly, "If no one claims her, she won't need a shelter." Double quotes. Dr. Keller gave him a thoughtful look. You sure? Jason nodded. She came to me for help. I think that was an accident. As the snow continued to fall outside, a quiet bond began to form in that little clinic, one that didn't need words or explanation. The mother dog had saved her family, and unknowingly, she'd begun to save Jason. 2. The wind had finally calmed outside the clinic, but inside, a quiet tension remained. Jason stayed through the night, dozing off in a chair near the recovery table while the vet technicians worked in shifts, checking vitals, changing heat packs, and monitoring fluids. He refused to leave. Every time he stirred awake, he would check on the puppies first, then the mother dog, whom he now called Hope. Hope. The name had come to him without much thought, but it felt right, like she had carried that word in her eyes from the first moment he saw her in the snow. By early morning, there was change. The smallest of the 3 puppies, a pale brown one with a white stripe on its nose, began to stretch and wriggle beneath the blanket. It gave a faint, hungry yelp that filled the room with quiet celebration. She's coming around, said Dr. Keller, who had returned just before dawn. That sound means her body's warming up and her energy's kicking in. Jason stood, stiff and sore from sleeping upright, and gently walked over. Hope lifted her head at the sound of her pup and wagged her tail weakly. Jason knelt beside her and gave her a soft pat behind the ears. You did good, girl, he said. They're going to make it. Hope leaned into his touch. Dr. Keller allowed Hope to begin nursing once the puppies were warm enough. The moment Hope curled her body around them and they latched on, Jason had to turn away and blink back tears. He had seen a lot in his years as a firefighter: flood rescues, house fires, even animal recoveries. But there was something deeply moving about this moment. No screaming alarms, no flashing lights, just a mother and her babies, reunited in safety. You're going to need supplies if you're serious about taking them in, Dr. Keller said later that morning. Food, heat pads, bedding, not to mention a lot of patience. Jason smiled, though his eyes still showed the weight of the night. I've got plenty of time, and after last night, I think I finally know what to do with it. She handed him a checklist of what he'd need, along with a few medications and feeding instructions in case Hope wasn't producing enough milk. Jason took it all in stride, already making mental notes of what tools in his shed could be repurposed for a temporary puppy den. You're going to be popular around here, she added with a half smile. A man with 4 dogs and a rescue story? Expect some attention? Jason chuckled lightly. I didn't do much. It's the one who braved the storm. You followed her, Dr. Keller said. Most people would have just driven by. Looked at Hope again, now peacefully resting with her pups snuggled against her. I think she picked me, not the other way around. By the time the sun pushed through the cloud cover and lit up the snow-covered town, Jason was packing the dogs into the back seat of his truck. He had arranged blankets, a heated pad, and 2 crates to make sure everyone stayed secure. Hope rode in the front with him, sitting upright and alert, her gaze scanning the road ahead like she understood they were heading somewhere new. When they pulled into his driveway, Jason sat for a moment, looking at the small house he had once considered. Too quiet, too still. Today, it didn't look that way. Today, it looked like it had purpose. He carried the puppies in first, setting them gently in a padded laundry basket beside the fireplace. Then he called Hope in. She stepped over the threshold slowly, cautiously, as if unsure she belonged. Jason patted the floor beside the basket. "Come on in, girl. This is your home now." Hope walked over, lay down beside her pups, and rested her head on her paws with a deep sigh. For the first time in a long while, the house felt alive. The next few days passed quietly, though Jason barely noticed the hours. He rose early, fed the puppies by hand when needed, and took Hope for short walks around the snowy yard. The pups, now warm and steadily gaining strength, had started to open their eyes, their tiny tails wagging weakly at every soft word or gentle touch. Jason had grown used to the company. The one silent cabin was now filled with small sounds: the shuffle of paws on wood floors, the squeaks of newborn pups, the occasional bark or whine from Hope, in their own way. They had become a family, but something lingered in Jason's mind. Hope wasn't just a stray. She acted like a dog who had known love before. She didn't flinch at people, didn't growl or hide. She seemed more like she had lost something and had been searching for it ever since. Jason decided to post her photo in a local lost and found animal group. The town wasn't large, but it was surrounded by scattered properties, cabins, and even old homesteads tucked deep into the trees. Didn't expect much, but within hours he got a message. A woman named Laura reached out, saying Hope looked exactly like a dog her brother used to own. Her brother, she explained, had passed away the year before in a tragic house fire. The cabin had burned down with no survivors, and though she'd searched for the dog, she had never found her. Jason asked if she'd be willing to meet. They agreed to drive out together to the ruins of her brother's old place about 30 minutes away into the deeper woods. He loaded Hope into the truck and drove in silence, unsure what they might find. When they arrived, the snow was still thick, but the charred remains of the cabin were visible beneath it. Crumbled stone walls and blackened beams stood as cold reminders of what had once been. Hope jumped down from the truck the moment the door opened. She didn't hesitate. She walked ahead of them with purpose, her head low, her tail not wagging, but steady. Jason and Laura followed her as she padded through the snow. She stopped near what looked like a collapsed porch and sat down quietly. Laura covered her mouth with a trembling hand. "That was where the front door used to be," she whispered. "That's where he'd sit with her in the mornings." Hope didn't move. She sat perfectly still, staring at the place as if waiting, as if hoping, even after all this time, someone might come out of it and greet her. Jason knelt beside her and placed a hand on her back. "She came back here," he said. Over, probably." She kept looking. Laura nodded through tears. She must have survived the fire somehow. Maybe she ran, but she never gave up. The wind rustled gently through the trees, and for a moment, none of them spoke. Hope leaned her body against Jason, and he steadied her. "She has a new home now," he said. "She's not lost anymore." Laura smiled sadly. He would have loved that. He always said she had the biggest heart. Before they left, Jason walked over to a nearby oak tree and carved a small heart into the bark with his pocket knife. He didn't say why, but it felt right. Quiet tribute to a past that shaped the present. On the drive back, Hope rested her head on Jason's arm. She didn't look back through the window. Whatever had pulled her there had been settled. Jason now understood. She wasn't just running through the forest to survive. She had been holding on to memory, to loyalty, to the last place she'd felt whole. And somehow, in returning, she'd finally let it go. Jason had always believed that animals could sense things humans couldn't: danger, safety, even grief. But in the weeks that followed Hope's return to his life, he began to wonder if dogs could also sense the holes left behind in a person's heart. Because slowly, steadily, Hope was filling his. The once quiet cabin had changed. The kitchen now had 2 bowls by the stove, one for food, one for water. A soft bed made from old towels and blankets sat in the corner of the living room, though Hope rarely used it. She preferred to sleep close to the fireplace. curled protectively around her pups. Jason, too, found his routine transformed. His days started with feeding, cleaning, and watching over the pups who were growing fast, their once wobbly legs. Gaining strength, by the end of the second week, one of them had discovered how to bark a tiny, high-pitched yap that startled even Hope the first time it echoed off the walls. Laughter returned to the house, quiet at first, but real. Each evening, Jason sat near the fire, sipping tea while Hope lay beside him. She no longer watched him from a distance. Now, she nudged his hand for affection, rested her head on his knee, and sometimes fell asleep right against his feet. There was no more hesitation in her touchingly trust. But it wasn't just Hope that was healing. Jason felt it too. The long emptiness he'd carried since losing his friends at the firehouse. His identity, his sense of purpose, it was fading, not all at once, slowly, like snow melting in sunlight. He found himself whistling again while doing chores. He cleaned out the shed and converted half of it into a warm den for the dogs, complete with heating lamps and hay-stuffed cushions. He even added a nameplate to the side, Hope's Haven. One afternoon, while stacking firewood, Jason caught sight of Hope sitting at the edge of the porch, her head tilted slightly as she watched the forest. She looked peaceful, like she had finally stopped searching. He walked over and sat beside her on the steps. "It's strange," he said aloud. "You've been through so much. Lost someone. Nearly lost everything. And yet you still had enough strength left to ask for help." Hope glanced at him, then rested her head on his shoulder. Jason closed his eyes. "I think I needed you as much as you needed me," he whispered. Later that week, Dr. Keller visited for a follow-up check. The puppies passed with flying colors, bright-eyed, wiggly, and full of energy. She smiled as they wrestled in a corner of the living room. "They're ready to be weaned soon," she said. "And they'll be adoptable not long after that." Jason nodded. "I've had people reaching out already. Folks from town heard about the rescue." "And you?" she asked. "Are you keeping any of them?" He glanced at Hope, who was watching from her favorite rug beside the fireplace. One of the puppies was nuzzled into her side. "I thought I'd just help them get started," Jason said slowly. "But now, I can't imagine this place without them. Without her." Dr. Keller smiled knowingly. "Sometimes the ones we save end up saving us too." Before leaving, she gave Jason a packet of health forms, vaccination schedules, and a list of local adoption contacts. But Jason only glanced at them. That night, after the pups fell asleep, Jason sat by the fire with Hope resting beside him. Outside, snow was beginning to fall again, dusting the trees in silence. But inside the cabin, there was only warmth. And, for the first time in years, Jason no longer felt like something was missing. He felt whole. The town of Willow Creek was small, just a handful of shops. A diner that everyone swore had the best pie in the county, and a community that thrived on shared stories. And in the weeks after the storm, no story was shared more than Jason Burke's. It began with a single post, a photo of Hope and her puppies, snuggled in their makeshift den, captioned with a simple line, "She led me through a blizzard to save her babies. And somehow she saved me too." The post went viral overnight. Within days, thousands of people had shared the story. Local news stations picked it up. Jason received messages from across the country, from people moved by the courage of a mother dog, and the quiet man who followed her through the snow. People began stopping by. Children came with drawings of Hope and her pups. Neighbors Jason hadn't spoken to in years came bearing treats, dog toys, and warm blankets. A local carpenter offered to help him reinforce the shed and build a permanent play area for the dogs. Even the school invited Jason to speak about the rescue to a group of students studying animal care. At first, the attention overwhelmed him. Jason had lived a life of quiet service. He wasn't used to spotlights. But every time he looked at Hope, calm and content beside her puppies, he reminded himself why it all mattered. One morning, while delivering a fresh batch of donated food, a teenager handed Jason an envelope with a note inside. "Your story gave me hope. I didn't think anyone cared about animals anymore. Now I want to be a vet." Jason kept the note in his jacket pocket, reading it often when the house was quiet. The puppies, meanwhile, had become miniature explorers. They charged through the cabin with uncoordinated bursts of energy, chased after each other in circles, and barked excitedly at their own reflections. Jason gave each one a name scout, Daisy and Rusty, and though he had planned to find them all new homes, his heart resisted the thought more with each passing day. Hope remained their anchor, calm, patient, and wise in her quiet way. She watched her pups like a sentinel, but no longer hovered anxiously. She trusted they were safe. Jason noticed something else. Too, her limp was gone. The way she ran now, ears up and tail wagging, was full of freedom. It was like she had shaken off the weight of her past and embraced her new beginning completely. One snowy afternoon, as Jason was stacking firewood by the porch, Hope began barking, not out of fear, but insistently. Jason turned and saw her standing at the edge of the woods, looking back at him, just as she had the night she appeared in the storm. He walked over slowly, unsure of what she wanted to show him. Hope led him a few yards into the trees, then stopped. She pawed at the snow, then backed away. Jason knelt and brushed the snow aside. Beneath it was a piece of rotted wood and an old, torn collar, weathered and cracked, but still faintly legible. Duke. He stared at it, realization hitting him like a wave. Duke, Hope's mate, the one she had likely lost in the fire. She had returned to him. One last goodbye. Jason built a small wooden cross and placed it gently where the collar had been found. He stood beside Hope in silence. The trees rustled gently overhead, and for a moment time stood still. "Your family is safe now," he said softly. "I promise." Hope leaned against him, her body warm despite the cold. They walked back to the cabin together. The porch light flickered on as they reached the door, casting a golden glow over the snow-covered yard. Inside, the puppies were waiting, barking, tumbling, alive. Jason opened the door, and Hope stepped in first. The days grew longer, and spring began to melt the thick blankets of snow that had once covered Jason's mountain town. Hope's puppies were no longer fragile newborns, but lively, curious little dogs who explored every corner of the cabin and yard with endless energy. Jason's life was full again, not just with tasks and routines, but with love and connection. Yet as much as the puppies thrived, Hope remained the quiet heart of the home. She watched over her family with a calm presence that seemed to anchor Jason as much as the pups. One afternoon, Jason sat on the porch, the sun warming his face, as he carved the final letters into the wooden cross he had made for Duke's resting place. The name Duke still felt heavy in the air, like a whisper of a story that had almost slipped away. He glanced at Hope, who lay nearby, her head resting on her paws, eyes half closed but alert. She lifted her ears as a soft breeze carried a scent from the woods. She stood, stretched, and patted over to Jason, nudging his hand. "Ready for a walk?" asked, smiling. They walked down the familiar trail behind the house. The forest was alive with birdsong and the fresh green of new leaves. Hope moved. With grace, her steps light and sure, her limp completely gone. Jason stopped near the spot where he had buried Duke's collar under the oak tree. He knelt and brushed away a few fallen leaves. The collar was still there, weathered but cared for. He placed a fresh flower beside it, then looked up at Hope. "You carried a heavy burden," he said softly, waiting all this time, hoping someone would come back. Hope sat quietly, as if understanding every word. Jason thought about all the nights she had spent in the storm, alone and frightened. About the love that kept her going, the love for a mate who was gone, and for the puppies who needed her, and about the way she had found him. A man who thought his own life had lost meaning. He realized that what Hope had brought him was more than just companionship. It was a reminder of resilience, of never giving up, even when everything seemed lost. As they walked back, Jason's phone buzzed. A message from the local shelter popped up on the screen. "Scout, Daisy, and Rusty have found new homes, all thanks to your kindness." A warmth spread through him. It was time for the pups to begin their own journeys, but Jason knew Hope was here to stay. Back at the cabin, the evening light streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Hope curled up by the fire, her eyes closing in peaceful sleep. Jason sat nearby, reflecting on the months that had passed. From the first moment he saw her shivering in the snow to the quiet evenings filled with soft puppy breaths. His life had been forever changed. He whispered into the stillness, "Thank you, Hope, for showing me what it means to care, to fight, to love." Outside, the stars began to twinkle in the clear night sky. Somewhere deep in the forest, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves, a final farewell from Duke and a promise of new beginnings. Jason smiled, feeling the full weight of a journey that had started with a shivering dog pleading in the snow and ended with a family healed and whole.